of you. I hope you're all well. I know that this evening is doubly fortuitous, given that we're about to decide who will be the next leader of our great nation. But while we're all voting and figuring that out, I'm going to distract us to welcome the last of our four speakers this semester actually. So this semester we've covered four topics. What is Islam generally? What is Sunni Islam? What is Sufism? Which is mystical Islam? And finally, what is Shiite Islam? What is Shiism? I am beyond honored to invite the speaker, Dr. Sheik Vinay Khetia here, who comes to us from the Iceland of Toronto, and has been shocked to see such beautiful weather here that he brought rain down upon us for the last 2 days. And he is actually quite unique in that he actually wears many caps. One of his most important caps is, of course, he has a doctorate in Islamic studies from the University of Toronto. However, he also wears another cap in that he's a traditional sheikh, a traditional Shiite Muslim sheikh, meaning that he goes around, he's gotten permission to teach traditional law from Iraq. He studied in Syria and other places. But furthermore, he also has traveled extensively throughout the United States and Canada, throughout different periods, holy periods of the Islamic calendar, giving lectures about the Prophet Muhammad, his family, knowledge, love, and issues of the modern world. So he comes to us with a wealth of experience, not just intellectually, but also experientially. And for that, I thought that he'd be an excellent person to bring. Furthermore, he's also opened the first Shiite Islamic Research Institute in the whole of North America. There's several in Europe, but he's finally brought Shiite Islam, Shiism, to North America. And he's responsible primarily for that, with the permission of both the academic institutions of places like University of Toronto and religious institutions. Lastly, I also just found out in our car right here that he's also a bodybuilder trainer. So I don't know how many other caps he has, but he'll be helping to bring me into shape sooner or later. So I won't just be exercising my mind with you all, but also, other things. With that said, Dr. Khetia will speak for 15 minutes about Shiite Islam, and then we'll have a discussion for about 30 minutes, and we'll open up to general questions. Thank you, Dr. Khetia. Please welcome him. Sorry.
Welcome, everyone, and good evening. That was, Professor Zaidi was too kind in his introduction, but thank you anyways to Butler University for welcoming me and bringing me down from Toronto for this talk, and Dr. Zaidi and his department for their kind invitation. So in my brief few moments with you, as you see the title of my talk, I'm going to try to conquer this in 15 minutes, but really in the discussion we're going to discuss a lot of these things as well as, one of the things that I'm really interested in as a teacher of religious studies and Islamic studies is how narratives shape how we exist in a modern realm, in a modern world, and the study of religion is interested in both the text and how people practice their lives. And in Islam, particularly within Shiism, there's a series of beliefs. And what I'm really interested in my research is how those beliefs have evolved, coalesced, and how they direct the trajectory of Shia Islam today. And among those very important factors is within Shia Islam, there is a belief in 12 Imams, that after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, there were 12 imams. Shias believe that there are 12 imams or 12 saints, 12 leaders that came after the death of the Prophet. And the final of them, or the last of them, is the 12th imam, known as the Messiah, or the Mahdi. The one that will come at the end of time to guide people. And Shias believe that he was born in 874, but then went into hiding, went into occultation. Now, Sunnis and Shias share the belief on this issue, but there's one key difference in their belief about the concept of a Messiah. Sunnis believe that he is truly born in the future. Shias believe that he already exists. And thus a central element of Shiite life and Shiite devotional life is belief in a living imam, but an imam that cannot be seen. So their devotional life, their spiritual life, their religious life involves communing in some spiritual way with this unseen figure. And this unseen figure is from the offspring of Ali and Fatima. Ali being the first imam who was married to the Prophet's daughter, known as Fatima, and he is from their offspring, from that line of the 11 imams after Ali. Why is this important? Because Shiism after 874 will undergo a period of difficulty, or some would say crisis even. Because for Shias, knowledge is comprised of two things. The Quran, which I'm sure you've already heard about, which is the revelation, the holy book for Muslims. And the companion to that is the Imam, the saint, the divine guide. So what does a community do when that divinely inspired guide can't be seen, can't be accessed? They have to come up with creative ways to understand this phenomenon now. And within that, of course, where God willed, so on and so forth, that's all well and fine. But how does a community prepare and negotiate and come up with solutions in the absence of their patron saint? And that's what I mean by the trajectory of Shia Islam. And this would, of course, give rise to a lot of creative solutions. The development of Shiite law, not that it didn't occur before, but basically it brought the community together and they began developing certain concepts of theology, certain ideas around Islamic law. They began developing their own legal schools. And this, as we'll see in a moment, has great modern implications. But that being said, Shias and Sunnis, despite having different beliefs, and you've already been introduced to what Sunni Islam is, unlike what we see often in the news, they're not in a forever war of sectarian strife. Historically speaking, Shias and Sunnis, you could probably think of it in some ways like Protestants and Catholics, not entirely, I'm just throwing that out there just as that might be something that you're more aware of, have not been in a permanent state of war. And we know this because historically they studied in the same city. Sometimes they would share seminaries. So there would be Shiites and Sunnis studying in the same seminary, teaching one another. And we have historical documents that demonstrate an exchange of licenses to teach. So for example, when someone becomes a scholar, they receive a license to teach, like a degree. And we have cases in which Shias are giving Sunnis degrees and Sunnis are giving Shias degrees to teach or to narrate the traditions of the Prophet. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that this idea of Shias and Sunnis being in this kind of permanent, contracted conflict or protracted conflict of strife is just not historically factual. And people like Tariq Jamil and others have written extensively on this subject. But the key distinction, which we need to keep in mind, is they have two different competing narratives with regards to salvation history. What is salvation history? Basically, what do you need to do, and how does one need to live their life in order to be eternally saved? Those narratives differ between these two communities. Sunnis being closer to about 70%, Shias around 25-30% of the Muslim community. And the seeds of these ideas existed earlier, but their respective salvation histories took approximately 150 to 200 years to form. So it took approximately a century and a half to 2 centuries for them to really coalesce. And they have very different trajectories, and we don't have time. I teach an entire course
just on this salvation history itself. But nevertheless, the basic points to get here is Shias believe that when the Prophet died, he left a successor. And Shias believe that that successor was explicitly appointed by the Prophet. And anyone who doesn't accept this successor would be seen as usurping power or supporting usurpation. So right off the bat, the heroes that would be endeared by Sunni Islam would more or less come to be known as, not in a favorable light, let's say, by Shiites. Sunnis, on the other hand, insist that the Prophet died and left the issue of succession, spiritual, political, and legal succession to the community. And his righteous companions took over after his death. Shias have a different narrative. Shias believe that in order to be saved, one needs to believe in that line of succession that directly after the Prophet came Ali, and then all the way to the 12th Imam. And these are particularly 12er Shias, who are the majority of Shias today. There are other Shias as well, Zaydi and Ismaili, but we don't have time to get into them at the moment. Simply put, one person's hero is another person's villain. That becomes a problem. And it would be something that would be the subject of tens of thousands of pages of polemical treatises and books and epistles, and probably what allows me to have my job, to write on it. There's so much to write about these things as historians of religion. And a part of that narrative, something that is obviously very important, is the story of Hussein at Karbala. Don't have time to go into this too much, except to mention to you that Shias have a very pronounced martyrdom motif. This Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet. Within 50 years of the Prophet's death, in the year 61 after Hijrah, so 50 years after the Prophet's death, his grandson rose up against one of the leaders of the time, named Yazid, because he felt he was unjust and immoral and was committing acts against morally sinful acts. Yazid was a drunkard, and that's at least what the history tells us, and most importantly, unjust. So the Prophet's grandson, who's believed to be the third saint, the third Imam, rises up against this person, only to be completely massacred along with his children and companions. A lot of discussions about this, but nevertheless, this epic, known as the Epic of Karbala, because he died in the city of Karbala in Iraq, would come to shape Shiism for the next 1400 years or so. Why? Well, one, it would give impetus to a culture of religious mourning, where there's this notion of Shias as a minority, as a downtrodden minority, mourning their spiritual heroes. The epitome of these spiritual heroes, in this case, when it comes to martyrdom, would be Hussein himself. And of course, there is a belief that all of the Shiite Imams are martyrs. So all the 11 Imams are martyrs, and the 12th one will be martyred as well. So this motif of martyrdom and rising up against injustice and being victims of injustice is very central to the way Shias have self-identified. over the centuries. But now, it would also become a political motif. Very interestingly. In what is now, we're jumping from 1400 years ahead almost to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Remember, we talked about this motif of martyrdom, this motif of sacrifice. This would be instrumentalized in different ways and at different stages. One of them is through a slogan that every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. Ashura was the day, the 10th day of Muharram, in which Hussein was killed along with his family and his companions. The one that this event is one that Shias mourn. And they have gatherings and they have poetry about it and all kinds of things, and religious devotion with regards to this. This would become a geopolitical slogan, right? An activist narrative would develop out of this. And this would play out in the 1979 Iranian Revolution, in which the Ayatollah Khomeini, whose picture is there, in 1979 overthrew the Shah of Iran, who was a Western-backed monarch, was overthrown by this Shiite cleric by the name of Ayatollah Khomeini. And a part of his mission was trying to make Imam Hussein's martyrdom and sacrifice relevant to modern times. So he instrumentalized an event that occurred over 1,000 years earlier, to kind of, not to say that he is like Hussein, I'm not saying that, but his movement is like the movement of Hussein in some senses, and the object of his derision, which is the monarch, the Shah, was in a sense like the Yazid of the time, the corrupt ruler of the time. So now we see in 1979 this being used as a means of political activism and revolution. This is Karbala today, where on average, I mean, we're talking tens of millions of visitors a year. I myself have visited there many times. It's a beautiful place.
22 million this year.
22 million this year on one day alone. So Shiites get together to remember Imam Hussein's, death and his sacrifice and his children for 10 days. This is known as a month of Muharram. It's 10 days of devotion and mourning. 40 days after the day of his martyrdom is known as Arba'in, the 40th, in which it is Shiite tradition for Shias, or anyone actually, there's even Christians and Sunnis. I mean, it's become quite universal. The majority of them are Shiites who flock to Hussein's grave in Karbala, in southern Iraq, to pay their respects and their salutations and to recite some liturgies at his grave. After the fall of Saddam Hussein, did not allow that. I don't know. Who's ever heard of the name Saddam Hussein? History, yeah. He was toppled in the American invasion. Yeah. Anyways, this history is really important to know. 15 minutes, we just don't have time to go into all of that. But he was toppled, he had banned the visitation of Hussein, and in response now, about 22 million Shias, or generally people, show up on a single day there. 22 million people, and they walk from all over the place. They walk, some of them 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 500 kilometers on foot, many of them, to arrive in Karbala. It's the largest gathering, as far as I understand, of human beings for a single religious pilgrimage on the planet. And that's unique to Shiism. So it's quite relevant and important. Are we taking questions now or after? So we'll take questions after. And as I mentioned, this theme of martyrdom would be approached in different ways. One of them is through religion, is basically the politicization of this movement. Right? Trying to take something that happened a long time ago and make it relevant politically today. And that's kind of what we see playing out in the world at the moment, in some ways. This thing is known as the axis of resistance. You've probably read about them, right? Lebanon, Iran, Syria. You have these different Shiite factions, loosely under the leadership of Iran, claiming that they're fighting, a resistance against whom they view as the occupiers of Palestine. So what's the point here? They're using Hussein. They're using something that happened 1,400 years ago. They're politicizing it and they're instrumentalizing it. It's very important to understand this, but this is not the whole story of Shias. This is one element of it. There's other Shias that say, oh, whoa, wait a second, Hussein is too sacred. You can't do that. I mean, you guys are modern day politicians. Some of you may be good, some of you may not be good. You're taking an infallible saint and trying to instrumentalize him in modern geopolitics. How much of this is religion? How much of this is just political aims? I'm not opining here. I'm just simply saying that these are discourses and questions that are going on, and they're far from simple. And one of the things that this axis of resistance tries to do is they try to unite Muslims. So they try to kind of underemphasize the difference between Sunnis and Shias and say that Sunnis and Shias need to come together for a common political, geopolitical goal. On the other hand, we have the person that I describe as the negotiator. His name is Ayatollah Sistani. He's arguably the most followed and revered Shiite figure in the world. Today, he lives in the southern city of Iraq, in the city of Najaf, which is equivalent of, like, you could say, the Vatican for Shias. The Pope visited him recently in a very important meeting. He's been nominated for, I think, Nobel Peace Prizes, or at least his name has come up multiple times to that effect, because he sees himself as a middle figure here. He doesn't advocate openly, towards violence, nor is he kind of indifferent towards it. He's very pro-pluralism. For example, after the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, after the American invasion, he kind of stepped in to say, no, we need a civil society, we need a democracy, everyone's vote counts. He was instrumental in the composition of the Iraqi constitution, supports social religious pluralism. For example, when ISIS conquered northern Iraq and was killing and terrorizing people, Christians and all sorts of people had to leave northern Iraq. They're not Muslim. Leave aside being Shia. Some of them were Sunnis. And he made sure that they were given residences in the city of Najaf. Right? I'm not here to romanticize things, or what I'm simply saying is that the Shiism is complex. It's a lot of different viewpoints about the other and how the other is to be treated and approached. And Ayatollah Sistani is, I think, really today, and this is an excellent book by Carolyn Margie Sayegh. Actually, I think she's a professor at the University of Connecticut, I think. I'm not correct. It's a superb book. It's absolutely superb book, published by Cornell University Press, where she talks about the role of Ayatollah Sistani in nation building here, and how his Shiite identity and his inspiration of Shiism led him down the road of construction of civil society, maintaining religious identity without alienating others, and so on. So it's a very good book. I highly suggest it for anyone who's interested in religion and the intersection of politics. Now, as for Shiism in the United States and Canada, often, and I'll wrap up. I know I only have 15 minutes, so I'll wrap up in a few minutes, but I think this portion is really important to understand. Often when people think of Shiism, sometimes they think in geopolitical terms. They think about these conflicts that are going on in the world right now, Hezbollah, whatever, these different things that we read about in the news. And that is just one very small fraction of the story, right? Shias in the United States and Canada have a long storied history. Some of it is connected to the geopolitics of the region, and a lot of it is not. These are just some general Muslim and Shia demographics in the United States. 10 to 20% of slaves brought to America are just Muslims. 72% of Muslims are immigrants or second generation. Shias account for roughly 25% of the Muslims in the United States. So out of 4.5 million, we're talking about maybe a million Shias in the United States today. Mostly, I mean, the larger populations would definitely be in California, New York, Illinois, Texas, New Jersey. And they have Islamic centers all over North America. And the interesting thing is that in the vast majority of these places, people are very indifferent to geopolitics. They're just Americans who are going to work, they're professionals, and students at Butler. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're doing all kinds of things, contributing to society. Not all of them are connected, right? This idea of the geopolitics of the Middle East somehow, being connected, being so influential in other parts of the world is not necessarily true. It's not to say that there is no connection, but I think sometimes it's certainly overdone in the media. As for Canada, Muslims make up 5% of the total population. So it's interesting, the Canadian-US dynamic is very different. In the US, it's 1.1%, Canada's 5%. That's a huge number. People often don't think of Canada as being like that. So 40.1 million is the total Canadian population. Majority arrived in the last 50 years. This is the largest per capita Muslim diaspora after the UK and France, tied now with Germany in Canada. That's per capita, right? And again, out of them, if we go with the general global statistics, which puts Shiites at about 20 to 25%, that's a significant population of Shia Muslims in Canada as well, just north of the border. These are some images. They say a picture tells 1,000 words, or these are houses of worship, pictures of Muslim school children, Muslims involved in civic engagement and politics. You are loudest when you vote. Muslims are very engaged, especially in Canada, and even I know in the United States. And Shias are front and center. In fact, the head of this, the founder of Canadian Muslim Vote is a Shia Muslim who encourages voting, goes door to door, goes to different mosques, encouraging people to vote. There's different imams that work with him, all encouraging Muslims, especially Shias, and Muslims in general, to be involved in the political process, to be a part of civil society. So this is just a little bit about the Shia community. Again, the Sunni community has very similar trajectories. Immigration in the 60s, establishing houses of worship in the 80s, the 90s, they start growing. They start building more Islamic centers, more multipurpose schools. They start building Islamic schools, which are basically day schools that integrate faith within a secular curriculum. Toronto, Dearborn, London, United Kingdom, Houston, these are some major centers. Shiism in America, of course, is very important here. This is an organization that represents Ayatollah Sistani in North America. They have a council of Shia scholars. Right? Dearborn tends to be a very, probably the largest concentration of Shias in North America. I forgot to mention is Dearborn, Michigan, going back to the 50s. And there are certain very important offices for different Shiite clerics. You have the Al-Khoui Foundation in New York. They have 15 branches globally. They're the only Shia organization to hold general consultative status at the UN. They have a ministry in the diaspora. They're a multi-purpose religious center, funded by the teacher of Ayatollah Sistani. So previously, Ayatollah Sistani was his teacher in the holy city of Najaf, and he started this organization. Again, they have different foundations in different parts of the world. Just giving Toronto as a case study, because I'm from Toronto. There's 25 plus religious centers, 5 full-time Islamic day schools. Shia Muslims occupy critical roles in business. The executive vice president of TD Global is a Shia Muslim, a practicing one, who's involved in his masjid, in his local house of worship. So Shias are involved in a lot of important positions in North America, very highly influential and highly outward-facing positions, both within the academy, within banking, within different industries. I myself have the Shia Research Institute, and we founded this institute just because of this, that we believe that Shias, as a part of the general Muslim population, have something to contribute to the wider conversation of religious pluralism and dialogue, especially in North America, both about the past and the present. So that's the kind of the impetus behind finding this institute known as the Shia Research Institute, which I head as academic director at the University of Toronto. So what does this tell us about the future? Well, there's a lot of interesting developments and interaction going on in the future when Muslims and Shias find themselves in very important positions in important institutions. I mean, this is one mosque here in Toronto, which has an 8,000 plus membership. This is in Toronto. 5 daily prayers and congregations starting at sunrise all the way until the evening. In the month of Ramadan, when Muslims fast. Who's ever heard of Ramadan here? I'm just going to be clear on this. So Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, right? They have an average 3,000 people a night for dinner, free. And it's completely run on volunteers. During the winter months, they house the homeless. So they convert the basement of the mosque, which is huge, you can see this, it's a complex, into a homeless shelter. They pick up the homeless, bring them, give them food, they can watch a film, they sleep the night, and then they go home. There's a restaurant, gymnasium, and a museum within the center. It's frequented by politicians, congressmen, well, our version of congressmen in Canada. So the whole point of this is that it's multivocal, it's multidimensional, and geopolitics is just not the only concern that people have. So I just wanted to end on that note. Some conclusions there. Shiism is profoundly diverse, similar to modern Sunnism in some ways. There are different concerns, different ideas, with certain base beliefs. And Shias have strong roots in the diaspora. I think that's an important conversation to have. So thank you very much. I guess now we'll get to the questions.
We'll hold applause until the end. Thank you. I have a few questions that I want to ask Dr. Khetia. I think the microphone is not working very well, so I'm just going to hopefully enunciate very loud and you'll all be able to hear me. And I will take questions from all of you in a few minutes. So my first question to you, and thank you again, is that you mentioned that there are several thousand Shiite Muslims in the United States. Given your travels and experience with the diversity of Shiite communities here, what are your thoughts on the relationship between the seminary of Najaf, and I'm going to particularly focus on Najaf because Ayatollah Sistani holds more influence here than in the US than Iran does, between the seminary of Najaf and the people here, the ordinary Shiites here. Will this relationship hold up? Will this relationship hold up moving forward? If so, how?
You want me to use this one? Is this one?
No,
Sure.
it's actually good. I was checking it while you were talking.
Oh,
As long as you
This is fine.
speak, as long as you speak
Yeah.
the volume he was speaking.
Okay, yeah.
But if you want to use it, I can turn that one back on.
No, I don't know if this, is this working? I think that, yeah.
But it's picking it up if you speak.
Oh, okay,
But I
sure.
can turn that one on too.
Sure.
Yeah, do it. Do it. If you want to stay close to that.
Yeah, sure, I'll stay close to this one so I don't can hear. Yeah, that's a great question.
It's not working either.
No, it's not working either. Okay, I'll just sit then. No worries. That's a great question that you asked about the connection between the Shias and the clergy in Iraq. And I think one of the important distinguishing features of Shiism is this concept of religious authority. As I mentioned, during the absence of the Imam, right? So the Imam is not accessible. So the replacement to that, in a sense, is referring to Shiite scholars. So these Shiite scholars become a means of religious guidance and religious authority in the absence of the Imam. This is a system known as al-marja'iyya, which is a source of reference. So Shias believe that in their day-to-day activities, to know whether something is permissible or impermissible, they have to follow a scholar. And they not only have to follow a scholar, they have to follow the most learned scholar. So it's a bit structured. And if they don't follow that person, there's a chance that God won't accept their acts of worship or their religious rituals. Because religious rituals have to be based on knowledge and certainty, or what is closest to certainty. So it can't be technically a kind of pick and choose situation. So because of that, yes, there is a very important link between the Shiite hierarchy, the Shiite seminary, which is found in Qom in Iran and in Najaf. There are two seminaries, and the Shiite diaspora. But the degree and intensity of that relationship, I think, will revolve around a few factors. A few factors which I've written down in terms of that. I think one is, will there be an equivalent of a Sistani figure, of an Ayatollah Sistani figure in the West, ever? I don't know. It doesn't seem like there will be at the moment. And the reason being is because these clerics have a certain amount of charisma. Their charisma comes out of them being trained in these ancient seminaries, being trained at the feet of great luminary scholars, living lives of profound piety, self-sacrifice, hunger. For example, Ayatollah Sistani, person who you saw already meeting the Pope, is now 90 years old. And I remember him once telling me, I had the opportunity to meet him several times, that the mantle that he wears, like that kind of cloak thing that he wears, is something like 50 years old. He could have anything that he wants, and he still lives in a rented home, despite the fact that the Iraqi government has offered him everything in terms of, whatever you want. In fact, Barack Obama sent him multiple letters asking him to enter into dialogue with him, right? Because even the Americans knew that his charisma was such that they could not do anything in Iraq really without his say. What do I mean? The Americans invade Iraq. Paul Bremer is put in as this caretaker. He says, all right, let's write a constitution. Let's get it together. So he appoints these people, comes on in his tank. All right, let's do it. They say, no, we can't. He says, what do you mean? I've given you the authority. I'm the caretaker. We're the new government. He says, no, we have to go to the seminary, to the Holy Seminary, to talk to Ayatollah Sistani first. Who is this man? This is the nation. What do you mean a nation relies on one person? He has no political power. He's a clergyman. He's a priest. Living in a rented house, who now, Bremer has to figure out what to do with this situation. And that's when it even dawned upon the Americans that they're dealing with something that they have to begin to understand because of the charisma that he had. And I'm not sure if that can be reproduced in Michigan or New York. I'm not entirely sure. The charisma, the mysticism, the mystique of somebody that lives their life in abject poverty, so on and so forth, very little involvement in politics. It's almost like this figure that people turn to for religious guidance, almost like a saint, really. And that's where, in comparison to the Iranian model, there's a lot of differences, obviously. And that's what I mean, that among Shias themselves, there's a difference. So to answer your question, I think it will remain, that connection will be strong between them in taking religious guidance and, and religious advice from such religious leaders. But that would also depend on the degree of the devoutness of those Shiites in the West. with technology and AI and pluralism and the plurality of opinions and access to knowledge, some people may look upon religious authority in the way certain Catholics do towards the Pope, towards bishops or archbishops. Maybe Shiism, perhaps it already is on a similar trajectory. That's just the nature of modernity, though. So there's a lot of factors that will determine.
I'm going to move to just having two questions so we can take some from the audience. When one thinks of the jurists in Najaf and Qom, one is reminded of lawyers. They're lawyers. That's what these people are that we're looking at. After all, the Arabic word for law, as we've heard, is fiqh. And a lawyer is called a faqih. A faqih. Now in the West, we only refer to lawyers when we run into legal problems. That's what we do. You have a car accident, you gotta call a lawyer up, and next thing you know, you're figuring things out. This is also true in the case of religion. However, in Shiism, the lawyers seem to play a larger role in the lives of Shiite Muslims. They have views on spirituality, on philosophy, and even psychology. Do you see this as an overstep of their authority? If so, why? If not, why not? Furthermore, if not, where do they get this authority to have an opinion on these topics? And do their legal reign then have any limits?
Well, that would require us just to go back a few slides. Just a second here.
We're going to want to take questions about 5 minutes.
Yeah. To this concept of the governance of the jurists. To answer your question, it is highly debated. Because for Shias, the will of God is understood in two ways. God himself through the Quran and through the saints, the infallible saint. In their absence, whether it's Sistani or anyone else, to what extent does their study, even their their years of study and contemplation over an issue reflect the will of God? They're not infallible. It's highly debated. I have a paper coming out on that issue as well, but an article rather. But it's debated. I mean, it's a highly contentious and debated topic. And there's a gamut of opinions on that issue. But what would seem to be the majoritarian view in the contemporary times is they're seen as spiritual gatekeepers of sorts. So while they do proclaim, they have pronouncements in Islamic law, for example, is this food allowed, or is this allowed, or for example, how does one purify themselves? They go, like you said, beyond that, because law and morality are not two distinct things necessarily. So I'll give you an example with Sistani himself, just so people can understand this concept. As there are, of course, problems in any community, there was a case in which a marriage counselor, an imam, or I won't call the person an imam, a counselor who gives Islamic lectures of some sort, was counseling a couple who are having marital problems. Couple gets divorced, and the counselor ends up marrying the woman that he was counseling. Now, technically, it's not impermissible. She's not a married woman anymore. But is it right? So the matter was brought all the way to Sistani's son, in his office. He's a jurist, so he should technically just say, well, it's not good, it's not, it's allowed, nothing I can say, it's legal. But that's not what he said. He said it's a betrayal of trust. So it should be like it's impermissible for that person. Which means that there's a law and there's a spirit of the law. It's more complex than that. So these jurists, while they do say, okay, this is allowed, this is not allowed, they do give ethical advice as well. Again, then their ethical advice is taken seriously because of piety, ideally because of piety, the mystique, years of study, that sobriety, spiritual sobriety that they have. that's all a source of their charisma. And I think that spiritual charisma is very important. And they view it, at least some of them view it, again, to different extents, as inheriting it from the Imam. So because of their devotion to the Imams and the Prophet, they kind of inherent, or some of that charisma flows to them. And they cite many traditions like al-ulama warathatul anbiya, right? That the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. The question is, well, who are these scholars, right? This is highly debated. Does scholar mean an imam, someone who's infallible, fallible? Who are these people? This, of course, is debated, but this is what kind of elicits different views, yeah.
Thank you. So we will take 3 questions from the audience at 7:47. Do we have a question? Yes?
You described the event of Karbala as the largest religious gathering in the world. Does that include the
As far as I know, let's say one of them. I don't know.
all right, so I was about to say about the Hajj.
Yeah, it's bigger. The Hajj is like 2 million.
Yeah.
It's 22 million. Hajj is 2 million. All that for someone who died 1,400 years ago.
Impressive.
Something about Karbala is probably pretty important to understanding Shiism. Yes.
I'm just asking this question to get a better idea of Shias versus maybe I think it's Sufis. One question I have: are all Shias really strict about the religion? Or are they really strict about it as much as?
It's a difference.
Sufis?
Some have a very.
It's very different.
Yeah, it's again, both in the East and the West. I think especially, we'll speak about especially Shiism in the West, in the diaspora. People approach religion in different ways. For some people, remembering Imam Hussein, crying for him, reciting some poetry is enough, and they don't necessarily follow all the laws, right? For some people, they follow everything. Right? There's differences. But I do think that the way Muslims are experiencing and handling kind of liberalism and kind of the individualization of religion vis-a-vis the modern nation state is not the same way and the same trajectory as Christianity. And there's been many studies done on this. This is a long subject. And there's different reasons for that, of course. And I think Shiites are no different in that regard. Because again, Shias and Sunnis have the same, they pray 5 times a day, they believe in the same Quran, they have most of the obligations are the same. Again, the theology, they have different theologies, but even with that being said, there is a variety of voices within the Shia community. Even among the scholars themselves, Sistani is an important voice, a big voice, is an important person, but there are people who disagree with him and say, no, his position on something on women or different issues. Again, there's a lot of different views. And in the Shiite seminaries, they're very open places where there's a lot of open dialogue going on these issues, and people are writing books and different things, and some people follow, let's say, more liberal currents. Just like any religious tradition. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I kind of a quick dual question. You mentioned the seminaries. How often do those happen, and how far back do they date as like part of the culture?
I would say they date back to around the year 950, 900. So we're now in 2024. So, yeah. Basically, after the Imam went into occultation, the 12th Imam was hidden. Shiites had to kind of get together to compile the traditions. Not that they didn't exist, but seminaries in a more formal sense of having these religious colleges for the Shiites would date back more to that time. So we're talking about 1,100 years, over 1,100, give or take. Yeah. And mostly concentrated in Iraq, in the city of Baghdad. In the south of Iraq, in the city of Najaf, and then it dispersed to Qom, to Ray, to different parts of Iran. So again, I think another important thing to realize is when you hear these, maybe you hear about some of these cities on the news, this geographical area has a long history, and people intermarry, they live across different boundaries. So when people come and conquer these this place and say, you don't talk to this person. They're like, well, what are you talking about? We've lived here for 1,000 years. We have a history and a civilization here. And these seminaries, there's a lot of cross-pollination between these seminaries, shared beliefs, differences. So, and they date back a long time. And Shiites take them very seriously and they revere them, at least devout Shiites do. And I think that was not taken into the political equation, especially during the Iraqi invasion at all. At all, until Paul Bremer was rudely awakened, like, oh my God, how do we deal with this? Because the Shiites are not listening to us. We're even offering them money and they're not taking it because they want to go ask this old guy what to do, And this is kind of where secularism and religion conflict.
Any other questions? I'll ask you a last question since we have a few more minutes.
Sure.
You said that Shiism is profoundly diverse, just as modern Sunniism is. How can Shiite Islam be as diverse as Sunniism when all of it is controlled by jurists or lawyers in Najaf al-Qawm? In Sunniism, there are no central authorities. There is no central authority in Sunniism. There is one authority in Egypt, one authority in Syria, one authority in Turkey, one authority in South Asia, one authority in other places. In Egypt, of course, in Egypt. But there are no virtual central authorities. No one person can control the narrative like Sistani or Khamenei can. So, again, as I said, in Shiism, one cannot properly eat or sleep or pray without consulting a jurist. And I know people who live like this. Like, literally, should I sleep on the right side or the left side? Let's go open up Sistani.org and see what Sistani says. It's that far to a T. And this is true in the Sunni world as well, right? Because the Sunnis also go and consult their own sources and the prophets to sleep on his right side. But in Shiism, it goes to an authority. It goes to a living figure. If the jurists have so much control over the lives of their followers, then how can there be any diversity?
It's a good question. I think that I remember one of my teachers a very long time ago, I think it was Rula Abi Sabit McGill, if I remember correctly, but maybe not, so I don't want to quote her. Mentioned something interesting, that the authority of these people comes from the people themselves. That's the interesting part. Again, bring me back to the whole when the worlds collided. Because the new occupiers of Iraq did not understand why this occurs. He has no army. He cannot say someone is not a Shiite. He has no authority to do that. His authority is entirely based on people acquiescing. There's no, for example, in Catholicism, where you can be excommunicated or something like that. There's no excommunication. People believe in him because they assent to his authority. And I think the diversity lies, the stability in the system is there, but right under the surface, there's this instability constantly bubbling because there's competition. When you have multiple jurists, now there's competition. Because Shiites have these seminaries, there are different jurists that come up. And these different jurists come up with different opinions. For example, one will say chess is allowed, one will say chess is not allowed. Now, someone would say, well, you can't shop around. Okay, if someone does shop around, what's stopping them? Can they be excommunicated for shopping around for a better deal? No. There's no pope. There's no council of bishops that can do that. The clergy is there, and they're important, and they're sacred. They're a sacred symbol because the people make them that. That's what's interesting. And that's what really baffled even President Obama. When they were dealing with all this, they're conquering a country, and they're trying to sort out this whole history. You understand, but he doesn't have an army. He's not forcing them. He doesn't have a gun to their head. So tomorrow they can pull the plug on Sistani if they want. If people rose up and that's it. So we don't want to follow you anymore. And that goes back to Allama Hindi, Tusi, and so on. So it's like in the earlier period of scholars. So it's at once very, as you said, very scripted, right? Because he publishes these books and people have to follow what he says. Again, not based necessarily entirely on his opinion. It's based on his study of scripture. He's just simply presenting his study of scripture. But at the end of the day, people have a choice to either assent or not to assent. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Does Sistani decide who can build a masjid or a mosque? No. Does Sistani have any course of authority whatsoever to ensure that people give their donations to him so that the seminary can continue? Because the seminary works on donations. No. The only thing he could say is, if you don't do this, you're not a good Shia. But then people will just follow someone else. Or follow the next person. So it's both provides this very kind of stability, and at the same time this instability is bubbling under the surface. And I think it's because of the competition. Because there's always a competitor around the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Khetia, for before I bring up the code, a couple of good things. I want to first thank the Muslim Studies Endowment for allowing us to be able to bring all four of our speakers here. And of course the Religious Studies Department, Philosophy and Religious Studies Department. Special thanks to Dr. Bauman and our wonderful Administrative Secretary, Claudia. This concludes the 4 events that we would have this semester. Hopefully next term we will also be bringing other people along, so have your your calendars open to that. And I believe that you have the QR code. So for those who want to sign up and put it into your QR. And by the way, it seems like some people have also been trying to share QR codes and whatnot, and this is part of the reason why I didn't put it up earlier. Please make sure you do not share these codes with anyone else. It is very much against Butler policy, and they will let the dogs out.